Welcome to Capacity Building Stories Climate Action 101, a podcast brought to you by the Paris Commune and Capacity Buildings Network in partnership with the United Nations University. I'm Eva Costas, your host, and in this series, we're breaking down the essentials of climate action, 101 style. Join us as we explore key concepts related to climate change while connecting the dots between capacity building, research, policy, and practical solutions. Let's dive in. Welcome to Frontier Technology 101. Today, we're diving into frontier technologies, what they are, how they're shaping climate adaptation, and how capacity building plays a critical role in leveraging these technologies effectively. To guide us through this conversation, I'm joined by two wonderful guests, Himanshu Sekar and Maxime Souvignier. Could you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hi, Eva. Very good morning and good morning to everyone tuning in. My name is Himanshu Shekhar. I'm a senior researcher at United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security here in Bonn. And my interests lie mostly in the field of making cities more resilient and adaptable to climate change. Maxime?
Good morning, Eva. Good morning, Himanshu. My name is Maxime Souvignier, and I lead the team for climate risk analytics at UNU EHS.
Welcome both, and thanks so much for joining us. Now, Himanshu, to start with the basics, what is frontier technology and why is it important in bridging gaps and addressing the capacity building needs to adapt to a changing climate?
Yeah. Indeed, the question, the frontier itself is something that one would say is relative, and that's how we can also see the frontier technologies to be. Something that looks fundamentally different at this point of time becomes a mundane thing. And that's what I guess is a basic understanding of frontier technologies. These are radical scientific breakthrough that have the potential to basically shift how we do things. Let's talk about, for example, when telephone came, it changed communication. When internet came, it changed how we look at things. How do we analyze, inform ourselves? Similarly, there is a new wave, what we call Industrial Revolution 4.0. And when we talk about frontier technologies nowadays, it's often about the words that we hear: artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning. They have a real potential to change how we interact, how we understand, and how we inform ourselves. So that's what, in this sense, frontier technology it could be seen as. And when it comes to climate change, particularly adaptation to climate change, the unfortunate reality of the world is right in front of us. The severe flooding that is happening in Central Europe nowadays, or any part of the world we look at, indicates to the fact that we need all hands at desk. And there is a very essential component that the technology can provide, be it in terms of knowledge, be it in terms of support, or be it simply in terms of capacity that is needed by people who have the knowledge to do it. Hence, the frontier technologies, be it artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and whatnot, have a real potential to enhance and maybe even transform the way we address climate change. That would be my short answer to this question.
So now, Max, building on that in the short term, what key capacities and resources are needed to seize the opportunities that these technologies offer?
Yeah, I think short term is the key word there. So as Himanshu was saying, so basically new frontier technologies are similar to what happened with telephone or email, etc. The difference is, and I think the main difference is that it's happening very fast. So the pace is incredibly fast, and in the short term, then we see there are already an emerging, let's say, actors and tools in the climate landscape. I think from a UN perspective, these use cases are very often concentrated in countries that are developing the tools. And I would wish, and I think that there would be many opportunity to include social and indigenous knowledge within the new developments. So especially in the global south, I think this is where in the short term we would need as a UN entity then to concentrate on.
Thank you. So now that we have a better understanding of technology and its potential for climate adaptation, looking at data, I'm wondering what kind of data is needed for climate adaptation policies, Himanshu?
Let's sort of take a small step back just to understand, we understand normally the risk as IPCC defines is, if we can say, it is made of three central components. One is the risk hazard itself. So for example, if there is going to be an extreme amount of rainfall, that could be a hazard. Second is the exposure. Am I placed? I'm living in a place where it is likely to rain that much. If not, then I'm not exposed. If yes, then I'm exposed. And third is the vulnerability. Do I have an umbrella? You know, or do I don't have an umbrella? If I don't, for example, if I don't have protection against that possible hazard, then I'm vulnerable. So this is in this understanding. For now, we have a better understanding. I would not say very comprehensive, but we still have a better understanding of the hazards. But when it comes to exposure and vulnerability to climate change, these are extremely complicated subjects, and they have thousands of data points. For example, my vulnerability could be different than yours, and so on. So how do we have this differential vulnerability into equation? That is where um, I think the potential of artificial intelligence come into play. Similarly, what kind of different exposure is out there, that comes into play, but also going back to the original understanding of hazard itself. Even now, a lot of understanding comes from the very global and regional level. When it comes to the local level, there are what we call as data deserts. Unfortunately, still in different parts of the world. So the AI has a very strong potential to also provide that sort of data gaps, that kind of information that is needed. What we need to move from is that we are often familiar of the concept of forecasting. So we know what might happen in a couple of days ahead. From there, now we move to go into what is called as nowcasting. We need to have real time and dynamic information at hand, and that sort of data is needed. So data on exposure, data on vulnerability, as well as a very nowcasting sort of approach to data is very essential to adapt to the very extreme nature of events that we see.
So I also understand that gathering and managing this data comes with difficulty. So Max, what would you say are the main challenges and how can capacity building help address them?
So I think when Himanshu is right with the, we have to move we have to add up to forecasting, nowcasting. It's extremely important, when it comes to climate change, especially when we talk about early warning and so on and so forth. I think that there are already a lot of capacities going on, but it's and there are also a lot of endeavors also from big tech companies to advance us as a public good research, for instance, in AI, flood modeling for nowcasting and predictions with publicly available data sets that could be used. However, when it comes to data, then it relies very often this type of models and open source data to have access to this data. They are very often promoted in this way. The problem is then, and that's the next thing, that the models then are actually black boxes, and that's a bit of an issue. And that's one point, I think. The other point is you need, when it comes to, so when you want to make this type of nowcasting or forecasting using new technologies, then you need also to have very high resolution data, such as remote sensing. Training in remote sensing is not something that is addressed easily. That's very complicated, I think. But the other thing, what we haven't touched upon yet, but then the other type of data that is needed is not just on the, let's say, the weather, the climate side, it's also on the impact side. So you would need also a lot of data when it comes to damages, buildings, people that are affected, and so on and so forth, livelihood. This is completely missing. I think, in my opinion, when it comes to training, capacity building that we can offer people, then that's first one on understanding what type of data is needed. Second, understanding how to, you will not be able to provide capacity development, capacity building for remote sensing, or it's very hard. So that's, universities are already doing this. But I think on the gathering on this damage side data, there is a huge gap, and in terms of what is needed, but also what is offered in terms of capacity building. in my opinion, this is where the biggest opportunity lies for and in the global south related to data.
And just to go back to a point that you had spoken about, Himanshu, before, so you were talking about how artificial intelligence can essentially help with gathering this data on exposure, vulnerability, and outcasting. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the role of artificial intelligence in this context of addressing the challenges that Max just mentioned and filling these capacity building gaps.
Indeed, I think Max has really set the ground for what I was about to address, is that we need to move from this hazard-based understanding to more impact-based understanding. So there is more personal, what it means is that while it might rain a lot, it would affect me differently. So the impact-based understanding provides this human angle to it. It provides a more individual angle to it. And that's where the challenge lies, not only to gather data, but also to interpret it. I mean, if we have this massive amount of data coming, there are very limited capacity to analyze and make sense of it. So the role of AI can be across scale at different steps of how do we gather it, how do we process it, and most importantly, can we also automate certain parts of this decision making? I mean, it sounds amazing to have this much of data, but it also means that we need capacity to distinguish between what is critical, what is non-critical, and so on. So very simply, I would say the first part is regarding the data projections itself. It can allow us to project a complicated set of data compared to what we do. If I am able to humanly have 10 different variables, AI can allow me to maybe have even up to 10,000 different variables and still do the same sort of forecasting, even in a shorter time than I would be able to. The linkages, the neural networks that are being created, that are just mind-boggling. So our role there, we need capacity to make sense of that information. So that is very important to keep in mind. Second part is the data analysis, exactly. So a lot of this data, for example, what we get, for example, from our phones, we all have become data sources ourselves, and we get these amazing, driving maps and navigation apps that we have that tell us about the traffic. It's just a compilation of the information that is coming out. So we need this sort of capacity also in the climate domain, where a lot of information that is collected, we need to have clear um, understanding of what qualifies as something urgent, something long-term, something medium-term, and based on that have automatic understanding or information being shared. And then third, and I think maybe most important from my point of view, would be filling the data void. There are parts of the world where still have very rudimentary, if in certain cases not at all any data. So while it would take a lot of time and resources, and rightly so, to gather data firsthand, we do have tools already at disposal that can allow us to look at what are the characteristics. Let's say if you're talking about a coastal city that does not receive that much of rainfall, is surrounded by mountain. So do we have a similar set of criteria that fits another city, and can we have some sort of data forecasting or based on that model? So this sort of what we call data extrapolation can already allow us to fill some of the data voids. So my wish for the role of artificial intelligence in this sense is to fill the data voids, help us analyze the data, and help us with the automation of some of the decision makings. I mean, of course, there is a lot of, it's a very loaded point, and there is a lot of parameters we need to set, we need to collectively decide.
Thank you for that. And I like, Himanshu, how earlier on you have mentioned the need for shift from this kind of hazard-based understanding to impact-based understanding, and really kind of look at the individual and human angle. And that actually brings me to my next question, because while the two of you have been able to tell us about the potential for transformation of these frontier technologies and artificial intelligence, just kind of see what their impact truly is, it's best to understand it through examples of how these frontier technologies are being applied on the ground. So Max, could you tell us a couple of examples where these frontier technologies have been used successfully to advance climate adaptation in different contexts?
Yes, gladly. So I think what I can do is then I can pick up one we were talked about nowcasting, basically early warning, and then how to deal with this type of events. And then, as you know, then as a follow-up So that would be one example, and then the other one maybe more on the other type of data, such as how do you account for damages after an event? How do you get this type of data? Maybe also using this new frontier technology. So on the first example, there's a platform which is called Alert California, and it's dealing with nowcasting of wildfires. It's basically a combination of a lot of different new technologies, LiDARs, for instance. So basically a very high resolutions camera that are looking at forests, combined with remote sensing, combined with wildfire modeling, and all that in real time using AI in cooperation with the private and public sectors in the US. Then they are able to basically use a network of state-of-the-art technology to support data-driven decision in real time. That's very impressive, and then it's very efficient at basically at not only predicting but then really reacting really fast to wildfire. That's one example, but there are others, such as another tool which is called XView 2, which is it's basically answering one of the main bottleneck when it comes to post disaster. So when hurricanes strike, or let's say earthquake, or you have tropical cyclones, etc. It doesn't have to be always climate related, but then you need to assess what is the damage, because then the next question is, for instance, how much finance is needed, to be channeled to these countries, etc. And then XView 2 is using a combination of several remote sensing satellites with on-ground data, combine them using AI technology with different type of imagery, and then identify damaged buildings. For instance, it used that in Syria for earthquake. That's not climate related, but then you get the idea of what it can do. I think these are two nice examples that are I think on purpose chosen in also not the global south, because I want to make a point on that maybe later on as well.
Great. Thank you for sharing those tools with us. Just to flag as well to the listeners, if you'd like to learn more about them, we'll add them onto the description box of the podcast. But you were just talking about the global south, Max, and especially the application of these tools at the local level with places that actually have limited resources. What would you say are the do's and don'ts for leveraging frontier technologies and avoiding malpractices?
Yes, that's the do's and don'ts. That's always a, I mean, I'm not sure there is a recipe. It's also very early stage, and it's moving very fast. I think I won't go in there, but maybe look at maybe some best practices, and then maybe some pathways that we can choose. I think first, so we talked a lot about frontiers, technology, AI, etc. But that's a bit of I mean, it's a very large landscape, so there is no AI. So there are a lot of different type of AI. You can divide that very simplistically in two big families. So you have big AI, so it's big tech. This is what you know as these large language models like ChatGPT that are extensively trained with very large computer power, etc. And then you have on the other side, the other side of the spectrum, what we call small AI or fringe AI. These are smaller tools that are based on the same technology, that are also trained on data, but then that need, less data intensive and so on. I think this is what we need, the direction we need to think. So basically, this small AI is actually very powerful when it comes to local coding. It could be locally customized, and it be run on local computers, workstations, etc. You don't need like a supercomputer to do that. I think there is a lot of potential for the global south countries, but also for smaller institutions and so on. So that's I think in there, I think there are a lot of entry points when I was talking about indigenous knowledge and social knowledge, to include that and to increase ownership using basically this fringe AI, where you would have in a way the global south not being the consumer of some AI tools developed and for instance like LAT California by US San Diego, the University of San Diego, but then they would be really the developers of approaches that and they would own the also technological infrastructure. So that is feasible for this fringe AI, and I think that that's a big policy challenge, because then I think then you would need to set up then transformational structures and in order to do that. But then you have already initiatives that are doing this, going in this way. That's climate change AI and also Afri climate AI that are trying to or helping to make this happen. And as you suggested, then I will post all the links. I'm not posting the links, but then we will put the links, then attach them to this podcast.
Thanks, Max. And that's the beauty of podcasts, where it's all in the future. So the links will make it there eventually. But no, I'm really glad that towards the end you touched on this people-centered approach and really integrating local, traditional, and indigenous people's knowledge into kind of the developing of these frontiers to technology. So on this people-centered approach, I was wondering, Himanshu, who would you say are the key actors or groups at the local level that we must involve in this process? And could you also specifically address how we can ensure that the most vulnerable groups also have access and the capacities to leverage these opportunities?
Indeed, I think what Maxime was talking about was very fascinating, and that rightly asks a question of who gets a say in this. I personally view the whole debate about frontier technology is not just of the technology or even climate change, but of social justice as well. We need to have a very strong justice lens, justice hat, and the tools with us to ensure that it does not become another divider. Hence, we need to have all the right actors, all the actors, I would say, on board with us in the process. And that's the thing. I mean, we don't need everyone to do the same thing. We need to start with the acknowledgement that a lot of frontier technologies are extremely complex. And while we need not have the equal capacity to create it, that would be simply futile, but we need to have right say at the right point of what are the parameters, what are the uses, what are the boundary conditions, what is the regulative mechanism. So while there is a usual list of actors that you would like to have, we need to look at this debate from the question of centrality and centrality. A lot of this technology is being developed because simply they are so resource intensive by big tech companies. So of course, there is a bigger role for them. There is a role for the government in ensuring that it's just, it's equitable. But you also need to think about, when we talk about the local level, is the role of the academia, the role of the vulnerable peoples. Alongside comes the role of civil society organizations, self-help groups, the NGOs, and the youth. What we need to have is provide them first the capabilities to be a very meaningful voice in the debate. So there is a capability side of it and there is a capacity side of it. So we need to have strong capacities built or augmented at the local level, particularly of this group of actors. And I think that's where academia also comes into play, so that they have a very meaningful say in the process. Otherwise, if we leave them behind, and that's the second part of the having the capacity, it means not only having access to tools, but also, for example, having training in using these tools. And that's the beauty of, for example, what a lot of these large language models, what Maxime was talking about, they have almost started bridging the language barrier. So you need not know English all the time to make sense of the technology. Technology does that. So there is this strong vernacular part of the whole debate. We need to ensure that everyone has the right tools, capacities. This is done in a language that they are comfortable participating in. And we have to keep in mind that people are solution providers. People are not just data points. And the moment we have this shift in thinking, because everyone is together we have to be together in addressing climate change. So by treating ourselves, people, everyone as solution provider, and then having this data mechanism, or let's say digital platform, that allows everyone to express their opinion, have a part of this decision making automated, and then make the most of it, I think that can rightly allow us to have what we call a true sense of participation in decision making.
Thank you so much for that. Indeed, I really kind of love how we talk about this whole of society approach that's really needed, and really kind of seeing people as solution providers. And now, just towards the end of your intervention, you brought in how that kind of trickles down into the decision-making space. And especially when it comes to really scaling these technologies, we naturally need to also involve decision makers as part of this process. So what would you say are 2 key areas of support that you would like to advocate for receiving urgent attention from policymakers?
Picking 2 is always very tricky, but I know that we have limited resources, so it's always a question of priority. I mean, now coming from our experience in the UN system as UN University, 2 things I would like to propose. First is the ensuring there is policy coherence when it comes to adaptation. And these policy documents, for example, a lot of countries are either preparing or revising their national adaptation plans. They do embed this possibility of digitalization, this possibility of frontier technologies. Unless there is a legal sanctity to these tools, there's an architecture for these tools to be meaningfully employed, we might simply miss the time. And then 5 years down the line, we would realize the documents are not providing us enough ground to work. So for me, embedding frontier technologies in the adaptation policy making process to ensure policy coherence is essential in ensuring that our documents are future oriented, they are forward looking, because this tool is extremely dynamic itself. So we don't know how it would look in a couple of years time. So that policy coherence with some margin for flexibility would be great. And second is the capacity of personnel at the local level, particularly at the very in the smaller cities in different parts of the world. We need to ensure that people are not only familiar with how do you use your computer. So there is, this whole step of digitalization, and digital transformation. So you not only have maps digitized, but you also have information from this map that could be read through a software, and then finally you have the set of information for making that decision, and your process changes. So this whole set of capacity building training that needs to be provided, I feel that is very essential. Without that, even if we have best of the technologies, we still would not be able to make most of it.
That really goes to show that capacity building at the end of the day is an enabler of all these innovations, but then also as well in terms of really empowering people to actually, like you just mentioned before, become the solution providers that they are. So you mentioned as well this kind of need to kind of look into the future and this kind of forward-looking approach. And now I'd like us to take a step back and actually look at the bigger picture of where this is all heading. So Max, how do you envision these frontier technologies influencing climate adaptation in the near future?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I was very much thinking about what Himanshu was saying about it's not because you have a tool that the job is done. And I think this is also looking at the bigger picture in the context of climate adaptation and capacity building. It's also not because you learn how to use a tool that the job is done. I think we have nowadays tech developers, big tech, but also for fringe, etc. They have the tools. This is existing, but then sometimes they really lack the necessary perspective. So or what needs to be addressed, or they don't have access to data or not to resources to really then address the use cases that need to be addressed. So I really think that there is a need for a tool, there is a need for capacity building, but there is also a need for purpose, what is needed. So perspective, and that's also the role of climate policy making. I think then what we need at the end, what is required is matchmaking between AI innovations and also collaboration between private, public institutions, but also, and Himanshu was mentioning that, academia, research. So all that needs this matchmaking between also global south and or especially within the global south. I think that you need for that, we need some really forums that some of them are already existing. So for instance, the AI Alliance that have the AI Alliance, sorry. It's an initiative to enable partnerships in global South countries with international agencies, local communities, and so on and so forth. And then they advocate for climate data ecosystem that would fit within basically the and enable AI for climate. I think there are also, in a way, and I was talking about that before, emerging capacities, especially for edge AI in the global south. And I think these capacities that are emerging right now, they need to be strengthened with data access, infrastructure, local control over the tools, and all that. I think that would be, it would lead, it would influence greatly and dearly climate adaptation very soon in the coming years, I think.
Now, frontier technologies are also advancing and evolving really fast, maybe even faster than our ability to keep up with them. So I'm wondering, Himanshu, what would you say are the unknowns, and where do you wish to see additional support in the coming years?
Oh, that's, I think, a very deep question. And I think maybe I would take this more as a cue to be cautious about the whole thing. It's an amazing tool. There is no denial about it. And there is a lot that we can do. But it's so swiftly, I don't know if even swift is the right word. It's such an exponential growth in the technology itself. We just don't know how it would look like in 5 years down the line, or even 2 years down the line. So how do you regulate these things? How do you provide? So that's, for me, is a big question. And I think a lot of UN entities are working on answering this question. Second, and maybe even more concerning part, is what we call the rebound effect. We don't know the environmental impact of these emerging technologies themselves. At the same time, the societal impacts, it might end up becoming another tool of inequality. So these are the things that I would be more cautious about. But at the same time, where I wish to have additional support is, of course, being cautious of these things. If I have to pick maybe two things again, one would be that we need mass capacity already of the key actors. We may not be able to do it for everyone right away, but at least the key actors that are needed, they need to have the right capacities and training, so that not only they understand what the tool is about, but the right perspective, what Maxime was talking about. Having a tool but knowing what it is capable of is equally essential. And second, I would go back to the policy making process again. There are dedicated team in almost all the entities, all the countries that take part in the policy making process, and they need to have a very good understanding of the tool. They need to have very strong capacities to understand what implication it has for policy making, be it for national adaptation plan, national communication, NDCs, and so on. So those who are preparing these documents, they need to be prioritized for capacity building.
Thank you, Himanshu. And bringing it back to you, Max, as a final thought, how do you foresee the pragmatic applications of frontier technology in advancing adaptation for climate change in the next years?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So it's a pity it's recorded, because then we can come back to this podcast and see how wrong I was in my predictions. But then still, I will try that. And but I think I'd like to remain a bit more general, and then a bit summarizing a bit what we have said. That I think to harness the potential of for climate action, then the innovations coming from AI, frontier technologies in general, they need to bridge between global divides. And it's really important that we foster collaboration between disciplines. So that's not just a qualitative approach. It needs also to be not only quantitative, it needs to be qualitative, also include social knowledge. It's very important. It's to bridge across regions, communities, and we need to ensure that these new technologies, they are not only enhance the ability we have as a country, as a people, etc., to combat climate change, but also we have to ensure also as UN organization that they do that in a way that is fair, that is in a way that is transparent, and also rooted in the knowledge in the countries where it is applied, in local knowledge. I think that's very important. And it's just when we basically will manage to do that, we will be uniting different type of technology, different needs, different perspectives, that we will use the full potential of new technology to address climate change and climate adaptation in particular.
Thank you so much. I think on that note, again, I love how you just towards the end of your intervention, you show that indeed back to the importance of this country ownership, but also people ownership, and these people-centered and participatory approaches through these technologies. But then it also goes to both of your interventions through the episode as well, show that the more these technologies advance as well, they come with a big moral and ethical responsibility from our side naturally, and then also for other international organizations. So again, I just would like to thank you both immensely. Please be sure to check out other episodes under the CB Stories Climate Action 101 series, and thank you for listening.